There are places in the American Southwest where the silence feels deliberate, where season trackers refuse contracts and satellite phones lose signal for reasons engineers cannot explain. For 3 decades, these places have been quiet. Until now, the reports began filtering in last November, each one dismissed as isolated hysteria until the pattern emerged. A security guard at a decommissioned research facility, a highway patrolman investigating an abandoned vehicle, a family camping in what they believed was Bureau of Land Management territory, all of them describing the same impossible thing. A figure that stands too tall, joints bending at angles human anatomy does not permit. Skin that appears stretched over a frame it was never meant to fit. And most disturbing, faces. Not masks, not crude approximations, but perfect replicas of people the witnesses know. A dead brother, an estranged daughter, their own reflection from 20 years prior. These are not random encounters. The victims share a connection investigators initially missed. Each had some role, however small, in disturbing what should have remained undisturbed. This is not a creature returning from folklore to terrorize the superstitious. This is something far more calculated. Something that has been waiting, watching, and now collecting debts written in sacred ground and sealed with broken promises. Marcus Chen had been staring at the same coordinate grid for 20 minutes when the GPS unit blinked and showed him in 2 places at once. The first marker pulsed where it should, Route 47. Mile marker 183 pulled onto the shoulder while he reconciled survey data with satellite imagery. The second marker sat 3 miles northeast, halfway up Razor Ridge, in terrain his truck couldn't possibly reach. He tapped the screen. The duplicate signal remained steady, transmitting from a location he'd surveyed that morning. A location with no road access. The rational part of his mind cataloged explanations. Signal bounce off the canyon walls. Atmospheric interference. A glitch in the $1,200 unit he'd purchased specifically because it didn't glitch. But the surveyor in him, the part that had spent 15 years translating landscape into data, recognized something else. The second signal wasn't drifting. It was stationary, deliberate. Marcus started the engine. The access road to Razor Ridge was little more than a series of suggestions carved into sandstone by runoff. His headlights caught the registration posts he'd hammered in at dawn, the orange flags snapping in wind that had picked up since sunset. The ridge loomed ahead, a dark mass against darker sky. And there, angled across a rock outcrop that required climbing gear to reach, sat his truck. Not a similar truck. His truck. Same dent in the rear quarter panel from the Costco parking lot incident. Same faded university decal in the back window. Same mud splatter pattern he'd noticed that morning and meant to wash off. Marcus killed his engine. The silence that followed felt compressed, as if the air itself had thickened. He pulled his mag light from the door pocket, the beam cutting through darkness that seemed reluctant to yield. The duplicate truck sat at an angle that defied physics, rear wheels perched on an outcrop barely wider than the axle, front end suspended over a 60-foot drop. He was still processing the impossibility when his flashlight beam caught the driver's seat. Someone was sitting there, motionless, wearing a Letterman jacket Marcus hadn't seen in a decade. Red leather sleeves, white wool body, his name embroidered across the back. The jacket had burned in his parents' house fire in 2014. He'd watched it burn. The figure's head turned. Not the smooth rotation of human vertebrae, but a mechanical swivel, like something with too many joints working in sequence. Marcus's flashlight hand began to shake, the beam jerking across the cab. For one crystalline moment before the batteries died, he saw the face. His own face. 17 years old. unlined, wearing the expression he'd had in his senior portrait, that forced half-smile his mother had insisted looked natural. The figure raised one hand and pressed it against the driver's side window. The glass fogged outward from the touch, condensation forming on the exterior surface. Marcus was running before he consciously decided to move, his surveyor's brain screaming about the biomechanical impossibility of what he'd just witnessed, about condensation patterns that violated thermodynamics, about GPS signals that shouldn't exist. Behind him, in the darkness, he heard his own truck's horn. 2 short blasts, the exact pattern he always used when leaving his parents' driveway. Trent Morrison woke to his phone vibrating with notifications. 300,000 views on the debunking video in 18 hours. The algorithm loved controversy, and his Skinwalker hoax exposed thumbnail, him grinning in front of the excavation site with a mocking caption, was performing exactly as predicted. He rolled out of bed, already mentally drafting the follow-up content, and walked straight into his bathroom mirror. Except he couldn't see his reflection. Every reflective surface in the house had been covered, not with cloth or paper, but with handprints. Hundreds of them, overlapping, pressed against the glass from the inside. Trent stood motionless, his content creator brain struggling to pivot from engagement metrics to the physical impossibility before him. Handprints didn't form on the interior surface of mirrors. The silvering was sealed behind the glass. He reached out slowly, fingers trembling, and touched the bathroom mirror. The glass was cold. The prints felt raised, textured, as if someone had pressed against wet paint and let it dry in ridges. His hand came away clean, but the prints remained. The security system. He'd installed 8 cameras after his last video went viral, and someone had egged his car. Trent grabbed his phone, pulling up the app with hands that had started to shake in a way that would ruin B-roll footage. The backyard camera showed black and white footage from 3:47 a.m. A figure stood in the center of his lawn, tall, impossibly still, and as Trent watched, it moved. Not toward the house, not away. It simply raised its right arm. 2 seconds later, according to the timestamp, Trent's bedroom light had turned on. The figure lowered its arm. 2 seconds after that, the light went off. The pattern continued, the figure scratching its head. 2 seconds later, Trent had done the same, visible through his bedroom window. The figure turning slightly left. 2 seconds later, Trent's silhouette matched the rotation. It was practicing, learning his move. Sarah's rental car kicked up dust along the unpaved road to the medical examiner's office in Shiprock, a place she'd spent 15 years trying to forget. The case file sat open on her passenger seat, 3 incidents in 6 weeks, all clustered within a 20-mile radius of the excavation site. Mass hysteria, she'd told the university dean. Shared delusion triggered by isolation and pre-existing cultural anxieties. She'd write a paper, maybe a book. Then she saw the foreman's brain scans. Dr. Yazzie pulled up the imaging on dual monitors, the neural pathways lighting up in colors that shouldn't have been there. Broca's area, Wernick's area, the angular gyrus, all showing activity patterns consistent with fluent bilingual speech. The problem was Michael Foster had been a 43-year-old Anglo from Denver who spoke only English and enough Spanish to order lunch. This section here, Yazzie tapped the screen, activates when someone is accessing their native language. Not learned language. Native. That's impossible, Sarah said, but her voice carried no conviction. He was speaking Navajo when the paramedics found him. Perfect Navajo. Archaic dialect. Kept repeating the same phrase. Yazzie handed her a transcript. Your grandmother could probably translate it better than I can, but roughly it means it wore my father's voice. Sarah's hands went cold. The drive to her grandmother's Hogan took 40 minutes. She spent constructing rational frameworks that collapsed under their own weight. The old woman was sitting outside when Sarah arrived, as if she'd been expecting her. "You look like your mother," her grandmother said in Navajo, "but you've forgotten how to see like her." Sarah had prepared an academic pitch, a request for cultural context presented with professional distance. Instead, she heard herself say, "What's happening?" "You know what's happening. You've known since you were a child. You just decided that knowing was inconvenient." Her grandmother poured tea from a thermos, the gesture unhurried despite the urgency crackling through Sarah's nervous system. The mining company broke the seals. The old protections. They took without asking, and now the Yinald Lushi collects what's owed. Skinwalkers aren't real. They are cultural metaphors for what, Sarah? For the thing that wore your classmate's face that night by the river when you were 8. The night you told yourself you imagined it because believing meant staying here, and you wanted to leave so badly you made yourself forget. The memory surfaced with crystalline clarity, standing by the cottonwoods, something calling her name in her mother's voice, the wrongness of its silhouette against the moonlight. "Maya," Sarah whispered. Her grandmother's face hardened. "Your niece went to the excavation site 3 weeks ago, chained herself to the equipment, made herself visible." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a photo taken by a construction worker. Maya in the foreground, fist raised, and in the background, barely visible in the shadow of the machinery, a tall figure wearing what looked like Sarah's face from her own college graduation photo. "It's chosen her because you rejected the protections, because you broke the lineage." Her grandmother's voice cracked for the first time. "The ceremonies your mother taught you, the songs I taught you, you treated them like embarrassments. Now your niece will pay for your pride. How do I stop it?" "You can't stop it. You can only offer restitution. Acknowledge the harm. Bind what was released." Her grandmother stood, moving toward the Hogan. "But the ritual requires belief, Sarah. Real belief, not academic understanding. Can you believe in something your career has spent 15 years dismissing as primitive superstition?" Through the window, Sarah could see the sun dropping toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, Maya was documenting strange occurrences for her environmental activism blog, not knowing she was being studied by something that had already decided she was perfect for wearing. "Teach me," Sarah said. Maya's last video upload showed 18 seconds of her checking camera settings before the frame glitched. When it stabilized, her reflection in the tense window was smiling. Maya in the foreground was not. Sarah watched the footage 4 times in the parking lot of the ranger station, her anthropologist's mind cataloging details her grandmother would have recognized immediately. The reflection's head tilted 3 degrees too far. The blink rate was wrong, too slow, too deliberate. And in the final frame before Maya jerked the camera away, the reflection's mouth moved, forming words that didn't match anything Maya was saying. The search and rescue coordinator spread a map across the hood of his truck. "We found her campsite 2 hours ago. She's not there." He tapped a location marked in red. "But you need to see what is there." The hike took 30 minutes Sarah didn't have. Her grandmother's words looped through her mind with metronomic precision. "When it starts wearing someone, it practices first. Gets the movements right. By the time you see it, it's already decided." Maya's tent came into view and Sarah's breath caught. The structure had collapsed inward, all 4 walls pulled toward the center point, as if some massive pressure had been applied from inside. But the tent poles were intact, still staked. Whatever had happened defied basic physics. Fabric doesn't compress toward a central point without something pulling it. "There's more," the coordinator said, pointing to the sand around the perimeter. "Footprints. Dozens of them. All matching Maya's hiking boots. Size 7 Merrill Moabs with a distinctive aggressive tread." Sarah crouched, her survey training kicking in despite the dread building in her chest. The prints were perfect duplicates. Same pressure distribution. Same wear pattern on the right heel where Maya's gait favored her left side after a childhood fracture. But the stride was wrong. The feet were placed heel to toe in reverse sequence, as if something was learning to walk like Maya but hadn't quite mastered the biomechanics. She followed the trail to where it ended, or began, at a flat expanse of sandstone. No more prints, just smooth rock and the fading implication that whatever made them had simply materialized or dematerialized at will. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from the tribal council. "Come now." The council house was packed with elders Sarah hadn't seen since her mother's funeral. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her grandmother stood at the center, holding a bundle wrapped in deer hide that Sarah recognized with sickening familiarity. "The Yeenald Lushi has chosen Maya as its vessel," the eldest council member said. "It's been practicing her movements, her mannerisms. When it's ready, it will call her to it, and she'll go because it will use a voice she trusts." He paused, his eyes fixing on Sarah. "Your voice." "The binding ceremony," her grandmother said, unrolling the hide to reveal items Sarah had seen demonstrated once, 20 years ago, in a ritual she'd later described in her dissertation as performative cultural identity reinforcement. Cornmeal, turquoise, a knife older than anyone in the room. "You learned this when you were 16. You said the words. Do you remember them?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She remembered dismissing them. Remembered explaining to her thesis advisor that such ceremonies were metaphorical frameworks, not literal interventions. Remembered the look on her grandmother's face when she'd published that interpretation. "I remember the words," Sarah whispered, "but I don't know if I can make them work." "Then Maya becomes what it wants her to become," her grandmother said. "And you'll spend the rest of your life seeing your niece's face on something that should not exist." Outside, the sun was setting. The ceremony required darkness. They had maybe an hour. The excavation site looked like an open wound in the earth, machinery frozen mid-extraction under floodlights that had been dark for 3 weeks. Sarah's hands shook as she poured the cornmeal in the pattern her grandmother had drilled into her muscle memory 2 decades ago. The elders formed a perimeter at a distance they'd carefully calculated, close enough to witness, far enough to avoid becoming part of the exchange. The words came back in fragments, her Navajo rusty from years of deliberate neglect. She stumbled over the pronunciation of Yeenald Lushi, the syllables feeling dangerous in her mouth, and began the acknowledgement her grandmother had coached her through during the drive. Acknowledgement of the harm done. Acknowledgement of the taking without asking. Acknowledgement that some protections, once broken, demanded restitution. The air changed first. A pressure drop her ears registered before her brain could process. Then the silence, absolute, suffocating silence that swallowed even the sound of her own breathing. Her father emerged from behind the excavator. Not a figure wearing his face, but him. Every detail perfect. The scar on his chin from a childhood accident. The way he favored his left leg. He smiled the way he'd smiled when she'd gotten her PhD acceptance letter, pride and love radiating from features that had been dead for 8 years. "You came back," he said in her father's exact voice. "I knew you would." Sarah's throat closed. The ceremony required her to continue speaking, but she couldn't force words past the grief that surged up like floodwater. Her father took a step closer. Then her mother appeared beside him. Then Jessie, her best friend from high school who died in a car accident their senior year. All of them smiling. All of them perfect. All of them wrong in ways her rational mind couldn't articulate, but her body recognized with animal certainty. "Keep going," her grandmother shouted from the perimeter. "Don't stop the words." Sarah's voice cracked as she continued the Navajo phrases, each one an admission that her career had been built on dismissing exactly this. The figures circled closer, their movements becoming less natural, joints bending at angles that made her vision swim. Her father's smile stretched too wide. Her mother's head tilted 4 to 5 degrees without her shoulders moving. Then Maya stepped out from behind them. Not the practiced imitation Sarah had feared. This was Maya now, terrified, confused, tears streaming down her face as the entity wearing 3 stolen faces positioned her at the center of their circle. Maya's mouth moved, but the voice that came out was Sarah's own, from 20 years ago. "You can't make me stay here. I'm more than this place." Sarah's words, her voice, thrown back at her by something that remembered every rejection, every dismissal, every time she'd chosen academic distance over ancestral knowledge. The knife felt impossibly heavy in her hand. The ceremony required blood, her blood, and a promise. Not a metaphorical commitment, but a binding oath that would tie her to this land and its protections for whatever remained of her life. She spoke the final phrases in Navajo that came more easily now, muscle memory overtaking conscious thought. She drew the blade across her palm, let the blood fall onto the disturbed earth, and made the promise her grandmother had written out phonetically: restoration of what was taken, protection of what remains, acknowledgement that some debts span generations. The figures froze. Maya collapsed. The silence shattered with a sound like glass breaking inside Sarah's skull. When she could see again, Maya was breathing normally, being tended to by the elders. The stolen faces had vanished, but as Sarah stood, she noticed her shadow on the floodlit ground. It moved 3 seconds after she did, lagging like a recording on delay. Her grandmother saw it too, and nodded once. "The old world is watching now," she said. "It will always be watching." By morning, every piece of mining equipment had been removed, the company citing geological instability in their press release. Sarah requested a sabbatical from the university. She had ceremonies to relearn and a niece to teach them to. At sunset, her shadow still moved on its own schedule, a reminder written in darkness that some knowledge demands a price for being forgotten.